Peter, a renowned businessman, was always in the spotlight. His sharp intelligence and business acumen had built him an empire. He was known for his strategic decisions and his ability to turn any venture into a success. His life was a series of important meetings, gala dinners, and million-dollar deals. Peter seemed to have everything under control, living in a world of luxury and power. Jane, on the other hand, lived in a completely different universe. As a fearless stuntwoman, her life was full of adrenaline and risks. She was famous for her impressive stunts and unwavering bravery. Every day for Jane was a new adventure, a new challenge to overcome. She leapt from buildings, drove cars at high speed, and faced dangers that would make anyone else tremble. Her passion for what she did was evident in every move, in every jump. Peter and Jane's paths would never have crossed, or so they thought. One summer afternoon, in a busy downtown cafe, fate decided to intervene. Peter was reviewing contracts on his laptop, while Jane, on a break between filming, was having a coffee to recharge. It was a casual encounter, almost imperceptible to those around them. But in that brief moment, something extraordinary happened. Their eyes met for a second, and an odd sensation took over both of them. A chill down the spine, an inexplicable shiver. And then, as if the universe was playing a trick on them, a blinding flash filled their vision. When they opened their eyes again, nothing seemed to have changed. The cafe was the same, people continued with their routines. But for Peter and Jane, the world had turned upside down. They didn't know it yet, but their lives were about to intertwine in a way they could never have imagined. That unlikely encounter was just the beginning of a journey that would change everything forever. Peter woke up with a sharp pain in his shoulder. He stretched, feeling a strange stiffness in his muscles that was not typical for him. When he opened his eyes, he found himself in a room he didn't recognize. The walls were decorated with action movie posters and gym equipment was scattered on the floor. He tried to get up, but something felt off. Jane, on the other hand, woke up feeling like she was floating. The soft mattress beneath her body was a complete contrast to the firmness she was used to. When she opened her eyes, she found herself in a luxuriously decorated room, with dark wood furniture and heavy curtains. She tried to get up quickly but was surprised by the weight of a body that didn't seem like hers. Peter ran to the mirror and what he saw left him speechless. Reflected there was the face of a woman, Jane. He touched the face, pulled the skin, blinked, but nothing changed. He was in Jane's body. Panic set in, his heart racing. How was this possible? Jane, across town, was also staring at her reflection in disbelief. The face looking back at her was that of a man, Peter. She ran her hand through the short, shaved hair, feeling the unfamiliar texture. The hands were large and rough, so different from hers. Fear and confusion overwhelmed her. What was happening? Both grabbed their phones, desperate for an explanation. Messages and calls were exchanged quickly. The initial shock gave way to the urgent need to meet. Amidst the chaos of their new realities, they decided to meet at the same cafe where it all began. When they saw each other, Peter and Jane's eyes met with a mix of relief and despair. They knew that, somehow, they needed to work together to understand and undo this inexplicable switch. That afternoon, the cafe where it all began was a scene of tension and bewilderment. Peter and Jane sat across from each other, unable to take their eyes off one another, trying to process the surreal situation. Peter, in Jane's body, was visibly shaken. He gripped his coffee cup so tightly that his knuckles were white. The voice that came out of Jane's mouth was firm but carried an unmistakable tremor. "This can't be happening. There must be some logical explanation for this," he said, trying to find a shred of rationality in the most irrational situation of his life. Jane, now in Peter's body, took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. "Calm down. We need to think clearly," she replied, Peter's voice sounding strangely reassuring. "Something connected us in some way. We need to figure out what it was." The panic was palpable, but they both knew that giving in to despair would not help. They began to recall the events of the previous day, searching for anything out of the ordinary. Crossed conversations, anxious looks, and an atmosphere of urgency surrounded the table where they sat. I was just working, like any other day, Peter said, passing Jane's hand over his forehead, feeling the soft hair between his fingers. Nothing unusual happened. Me too, Jane replied, nervously shuffling through Peter's papers on the table. But when our eyes met, I felt something strange. The realization that their casual encounter at the cafe might be the key to understanding what had happened began to form. They both stood up, determined to investigate every detail of that moment. The cafe, once a mundane place, was now a minefield of potential clues. Every conversation they had with the staff, every detail they observed seemed loaded with hidden meanings. But answers did not come easily. Frustration began to mount, and the panic threatened to return. Suddenly, Jane, in Peter's body, had an idea. What if this is a test? Something to teach us a lesson we haven't yet understood. She looked deeply into Peter's eyes, which were now her own. Maybe we need to learn something about each other to reverse this. Peter, reluctant but without other options, agreed. They found themselves forced to explore not only the mysteries of the inexplicable switch, but also the mysteries of each other. The initial panic began to give way to a cautious understanding. They both realized that, to undo this surreal situation, they would have to dive deep into each other's lives and experiences. Amidst the whirlwind of emotions and uncertainties, Peter and Jane knew they had to make a practical decision. Gathered once again in Peter's spacious living room, surrounded by luxury that now felt out of place for both, it was time to devise a plan. Okay, we need to work together to solve this, said Jane, in Peter's body, trying to keep her voice steady. She looked around, trying to get used to the new perspective of being in a different body. But first, we need to learn how to live in each other's bodies. Peter, now in Jane's body, nodded, still feeling uncomfortable. Right, let's start with the basics. What is your typical day like? He asked, looking at her with a mix of curiosity and apprehension. Jane smiled, a smile that seemed out of place on Peter's face. Well, I'm a stunt woman. My job is mostly physical. Training, rehearsing stunts, performing action scenes. It's dangerous and requires a lot of preparation. Peter swallowed hard, imagining himself facing the daily dangers of Jane's life. And you? What should I know about being a successful businessman? She asked, trying to imagine the responsibilities and pressures she now faced. Meetings, financial decisions, negotiations with clients and investors, Peter explained. It's all about strategy and control. We need to quickly learn each other's routines to avoid raising suspicion. They spent hours discussing details of their lives, from daily routines to small habits they needed to replicate to maintain appearances. Peter taught Jane how to use his technological devices, access email accounts, and handle important meetings. Jane, in turn, took Peter to her training studio, showing him how to perform basic moves and how to avoid injuries. The initial tension began to dissipate as they both dedicated themselves to understanding the complexity of each other's lives. Moments of frustration arose, but there were also laughter and discoveries. Peter found that Jane had a meticulous and strategic side to her work, and Jane realized that Peter's life required an emotional and mental resilience she hadn't imagined. We're going to need to trust each other completely, Jane said, looking into Peter's eyes with determination. We can't afford to make mistakes. Peter agreed, feeling a new admiration for Jane. We'll make it. We have to. With a temporary agreement sealed and a plan in action, Peter and Jane prepared to face the colossal challenge of living each other's lives. What began as an unlikely encounter and a chaotic morning was now transforming into a journey of mutual understanding and cooperation. Together, they were ready to face the unknown, with the hope that this unlikely alliance would lead them back to their original lives. The next morning, Peter, still in Jane's body, woke up at dawn. Determined to face the day with courage, he put on Jane's workout clothes and looked at himself in the mirror, adjusting his posture. Let's do this, Peter, he muttered to himself, trying to adopt Jane's unwavering confidence. Meanwhile, Jane, still in Peter's body, was in his luxurious kitchen, staring at a tablet full of appointments and emails. She took a deep breath and started preparing for the first challenge, a meeting with important investors. She dressed in a perfectly tailored suit and forced herself to step into the role of a successful businessman. Peter arrived at Jane's training studio, where he was met with curious looks. He tried to hide his nervousness, but his clumsy movements betrayed his lack of experience. Jane had left clear and concise instructions on what he should do, but executing them was another story. During the warm-up, he stumbled several times, his muscles still adjusting to the new physical reality. Each fall was a painful lesson, but he got up, determined not to give up. Jane's colleagues, though intrigued, offered support and tips, helping him improve little by little. Meanwhile, Jane was in a conference room, surrounded by investors with critical eyes. She maintained her composure, using the knowledge Peter had shared. The presentation was full of financial terms and market strategies, something that once seemed so distant to her. As the hours passed, Jane began to realize that there was a certain similarity between the mental control needed in the business world and the concentration required in her stunts. She used this insight to navigate the difficult questions, answering with confidence and clarity. Peter, on the other hand, was beginning to adapt to the training routine. He still made mistakes, but they were becoming less frequent. The stunts that once seemed impossible now began to make sense, each movement flowing more naturally. That night, exhausted and full of new experiences, they met again at Peter's apartment. "How was your day?" Jane asked as she poured herself a glass of water. "Challenging," Peter admitted, massaging his sore muscles. "But I managed to get through the training without breaking anything." "And you?" Jane smiled, a tired but satisfied smile. "The meeting was interesting. I don't think I did anything to ruin the company, at least." They laughed, relieved to have survived the first day. "I think we're starting to understand a bit more about each other," Peter said, raising his glass in a symbolic toast. Jane agreed. "Yes, but we still have a long way to go." With the first steps in the new reality taken, Peter and Jane began to realize that, despite the difficulties, they were learning and growing. Each day was a new opportunity to challenge themselves and understand each other more deeply. And so, the journey continued, full of surprises and lessons, as they sought a way back to their original lives. The following days were a whirlwind of challenges and learning for Peter and Jane. Each of them was immersed in the other's world, trying to keep up and learn as much as possible. For Peter, Jane's routine was a physical marathon. He woke up before dawn to train, performing exercises that required strength, agility, and precision. The stunts that once seemed impossible were now a daily challenge. Every jump, every movement, he felt Jane's body molding to his commands, albeit with difficulty. He stumbled, fell, and got injured, but Jane's determination seemed to be infiltrating his mind. In one of those training sessions, Peter faced one of the biggest challenges: a complex jump from one building to another. The height was intimidating, and the fear paralyzed him. However, remembering Jane's courage, he took a deep breath and made the leap. For a moment, he felt free as if flying. Upon landing on the other side, he felt a wave of adrenaline and accomplishment. He was beginning to understand what drove Jane: the freedom and the overcoming of limits. Jane, on the other hand, was facing a different but equally intense battlefield. Peter's corporate world was a jungle of negotiations, contracts, and strategic decisions. She spent hours in meetings trying to decipher financial terms and market strategies. The frenetic pace and heavy responsibilities left her exhausted but also fascinated. During a crucial meeting, Jane had to present a business proposal to a group of foreign investors. The environment was tense, and she knew that any mistake could be costly. With Peter's notes and her own intuition, she navigated the presentation, answering difficult questions with confidence. She began to see the similarities between the pressure of an action scene and the intensity of a high-level negotiation. On a particularly challenging afternoon, Jane had to deal with a corporate crisis. An important client was dissatisfied and threatening to break the contract. Using the improvisation skills she learned as a stuntwoman, Jane managed to calm the situation, offering creative solutions that pleased the client. By the end of the day, she realized that confidence and quick thinking were valuable skills in both worlds. As the days turned into weeks, Peter and Jane began to gain mutual respect. Peter learned to admire Jane's courage and passion, while she began to understand Peter's strategic intelligence and emotional resilience. Each challenge overcome was a shared victory, a step further in the journey of self-discovery. One quiet night, while resting in Peter's apartment, they reflected on the past weeks. "I never imagined your life was so intense," Peter said, applying ice to his sore muscles. "And I never thought yours required so much mental courage," replied Jane, holding a glass of wine. "We're learning more than just how to live in each other's bodies." Peter smiled. "We're learning to be better versions of ourselves." With each challenge faced and each lesson learned, Peter and Jane were getting closer to the truth about themselves and what they needed to learn to reverse the switch. The journey was arduous, but also full of valuable discoveries, transforming them in ways they could never have imagined. As time passed, the understanding Peter and Jane developed for each other deepened into something more tangible: genuine empathy. They were not just living each other's lives. They were beginning to feel the emotions, fears, and hopes that drove their daily actions. Peter, still in Jane's body, started spending more time in her apartment, exploring her belongings, trying to understand better who she was. He found an old photo album filled with pictures of a young Jane at various stages of her life. He saw photos of her with family, friends, in gymnastics competitions, and at parties. Each picture told a story of resilience, passion, and determination. On a high shelf, he found a box of trophies and medals. Reading the inscriptions, he realized just how talented Jane had always been. She had an impressive collection of achievements, each marked by a challenge overcome. He felt a deep admiration for her, understanding the dedication and sacrifice her career demanded. Meanwhile, Jane, still in Peter's body, began to explore his office. Among the documents and contracts, she found an old diary, something Peter seemed to have forgotten about. The pages were filled with notes about his ambitions, fears, and personal reflections. She read about Peter's early years as a businessman, his doubts, and moments of triumph. The vulnerability he showed in his written words contrasted with the confident facade he maintained daily. Jane also found a collection of letters stored in a drawer. They were thank-you letters from employees and business partners, expressing gratitude for the support and opportunities Peter had provided. She began to see Peter not just as a cold, calculating businessman, but as someone who genuinely cared about the people around him. One evening, Peter found Jane's diary. Hesitant at first, he began to read the pages, discovering intimate thoughts and feelings she had never shared with anyone. He read about her fears before a big action scene, the pain from injuries she had faced, and the inner strength that drove her to continue. He saw how much she loved what she did despite the risks, and how each stunt was a dance of freedom for her. Jane, on her side, found a home video of Peter with his family. She saw a side of him she never imagined, a caring and playful man with his nephews, laughing and having fun. She realized that behind the seriousness of the businessman was a deeply human and loving man. With each discovery, the barrier between Peter and Jane diminished. They began to share these new insights with each other, revealing secrets and stories they had never told anyone. The empathy grew, and with it, a profound mutual respect. One night, sitting on the terrace of Peter's apartment, watching the city lights, they talked about their discoveries. "I never knew how much you sacrificed to get where you are," Peter said, his voice soft in Jane's body. "And I never knew how much you cared about the people around you," Jane replied with a look of respect. "You are more than just a brilliant businessman. You are someone who makes a difference in people's lives." The silence that followed was full of understanding and connection. They were beginning to see the world not just through each other's eyes, but with each other's hearts. The empathy they were building was a bridge, linking their experiences and emotions in a way that transformed their perceptions. "We're learning more than we ever imagined," Peter said, looking at the stars. "Maybe this is exactly what we needed, a chance to see the world from a new perspective." Jane nodded, and to understand that, despite our differences, we are more alike than we thought. The empathy and understanding between Peter and Jane were not only helping them navigate the complexities of their switched lives, but also bringing them closer to a complete understanding necessary to reverse the body switch. Every day was a step forward, not just to undo the switch but to become better versions of themselves, equipped with a deeper empathy and respect for each other. As the weeks went by, the understanding that Peter and Jane were developing for each other deepened into something more profound: genuine empathy. They weren't just living each other's lives. They were beginning to truly feel the emotions, fears, and hopes that drove each other's actions. Peter, now more accustomed to Jane's body, was at a film set preparing for a particularly dangerous stunt scene. The director explained the sequence: a jump between two buildings, followed by a controlled fall onto a roof below. Peter felt his heart race at the thought of the jump, the real and palpable fear Jane faced every day. "Are you okay, Jane?" one of the fellow stunt performers asked, noticing the tension on his face. Peter took a deep breath, trying to summon the courage he so admired in Jane. "Yes, I'm fine," he replied, more to himself than to the others. When it came time for the jump, he focused, visualized the movement, and leaped. The world seemed to stop as he soared through the air, the perfection of his execution drawing applause and gasps from the crowd. Upon landing safely, he knew he had not only conquered the physical challenge, but also the fear that had always haunted Jane. Meanwhile, Jane, in Peter's body, was facing an equally significant challenge. Peter had always struggled with the emotional pressure of a major project involving the revitalization of a struggling community. The project required not only business skills but also deep empathy and the ability to connect with the people affected. Jane decided it was time to tackle this head-on. She organized a meeting with the community leaders, listening carefully to their concerns and hopes. She used her natural ability to connect with people, something that always stood out in her stunt work, to build a bridge of trust with the community. Instead of just offering business solutions, she provided emotional and practical support, showing that the company truly cared. The community's reaction was transformative. People began to believe in the project, seeing it not just as a corporate endeavor but as a genuine partnership. Jane felt deep satisfaction seeing the first positive changes, knowing she was helping Peter overcome one of his biggest emotional barriers. One quiet night, they met to share their achievements. "You did it," said Jane, her eyes shining. "I saw the video of the jump. It was perfect." "And you saved the project," Peter replied, impressed. "You managed to turn it around." They embraced, feeling the deep connection that now bound them. "I think we're helping each other grow in ways we never imagined," said Jane, holding Peter's hand. "And maybe," Peter added, "that's the true purpose of all this: to learn, grow, and help each other." With these words, they realized they were closer than ever to understanding the lesson they needed to learn to switch back to their original bodies. But more importantly, they were becoming better people, stronger and more connected, ready to face any challenge together. As the days of training and learning turned into a routine, something unexpected began to flourish between Peter and Jane: a sincere friendship and unwavering trust. It was no longer just about surviving in each other's bodies. It was about truly supporting, understanding, and growing together. Peter, in Jane's body, was in the middle of a stunt training session when he twisted his ankle during a jump. The pain was intense, and he sat on the ground, frustrated and exhausted. Jane, who had been watching the training from a distance to offer support, ran to him. In Peter's body, she helped him up, concern evident on her face. "Are you okay?" she asked, holding him firmly. "Not really," he admitted, trying to hide the pain. "I think I twisted my ankle." Jane sighed, pulling up a chair for him to sit. "Let's take care of it. You need to rest. I know how hard it is to stop, but you have to listen to your body." As she treated his ankle, Peter felt a wave of gratitude. "Thank you, Jane. I don't know what I would do without you." She smiled, her eyes reflecting genuine warmth. "We're in this together, remember? And I couldn't do this without you either." As Peter rested, he had time to reflect on the trust they were building. He knew he could rely on Jane in any situation, and this gave him a security he had never felt before. Jane, on her part, was discovering how much Peter's presence gave her strength, especially in the toughest corporate situations. One night, after a long day of work, they decided to do something different. Peter suggested they watch a movie together, something Jane loved but he rarely had time to enjoy. They settled on the couch, a bowl of popcorn between them, and chose a classic action movie. During the movie, Peter found himself laughing and enjoying himself in a way he hadn't in a long time. He began to understand why Jane loved what she did. The thrill, the adrenaline, the art behind every action scene. Jane, on the other hand, realized that Peter, despite his serious facade, had a relaxed and fun side she had never imagined. As the night went on, their conversation flowed naturally. They shared childhood stories, dreams, and fears they had never told anyone. The friendship forming between them was deep and authentic, based on mutual trust and respect. "You know," Jane said, looking at Peter, "I never thought I could trust someone like this. You have surprised me in so many ways. And you have shown me a side of life I never would have known," Peter replied, smiling. "I think we are changing each other for the better." They laughed, a laugh full of relief and camaraderie. They were beginning to see the world not just through each other's eyes, but with each other's hearts. The empathy they were building was a bridge, linking their experiences and emotions in a way that transformed their perceptions. "We're learning more than we ever imagined," Peter said, looking at the stars. "Maybe this is exactly what we needed, a chance to see the world from a new perspective." Jane nodded, "And to understand that, despite our differences, we are more alike than we thought." The trust and friendship between Peter and Jane continued to grow, becoming the solid foundation upon which they faced each new challenge. They learned to trust each other in ways they never imagined, discovering that together, they were stronger and more capable than they could ever be alone. In that moment, as they laughed and shared dreams under the soft glow of the television, they realized that no matter what the future held, they had found something precious in each other. A true friendship built on the unshakable foundation of mutual trust. The intense days of training and learning flowed into a certain routine until an unexpected crisis tested the strength of the trust and friendship that Peter and Jane were building. It was a cold morning when the news arrived. An emergency crisis threatened both Peter's business world and Jane's career. A crucial corporate merger was in jeopardy due to an unexpected move by a competitor, while Jane had to perform a dangerous live stunt during an international film event. Both events were scheduled for the same day and time, in opposite parts of the city. Peter, in Jane's body, knew he had to perform the stunt she had always feared. The Angel's Leap, now live in front of thousands of spectators. Jane, in Peter's body, had to save the merger, negotiating with a group of ruthless executives determined to sabotage the deal. They decided that the only way to overcome the challenge was to trust each other completely and use everything they had learned during this time. With one last hug, they went their separate ways, taking with them the strength and confidence they had built together. On the film set, Peter took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the expectations on him. He knew he couldn't fail. Feeling Jane's body, he found an unexpected calm. She was with him in spirit, her courage and passion infusing every move. When the time came for the leap, Peter focused, visualized the movement, and jumped. The world seemed to stop as he flew through the air, the perfection of his execution drawing applause and gasps from the crowd. Upon landing safely, he knew he had not only conquered the physical challenge, but also the fear that had always haunted Jane. At the same time, Jane was in the conference room, facing the executives with a mix of nervousness and determination. She used Peter's strategic intelligence and her own ability to connect emotionally. As the executives tried to manipulate her, she remained firm, disarming each attempt with solid arguments and unwavering confidence. When she finally presented the final proposal, she managed to turn the tables in their favor, securing the merger and surprising everyone in the room. After both events, Peter and Jane met again, exhausted but triumphant. "You did it," said Jane, smiling proudly. "I saw the leap. It was perfect." "And you saved the merger," replied Peter admiringly. "You managed to do the impossible." They hugged, knowing they had overcome the biggest challenge of their lives. The lessons learned, the trust built, and the empathy developed had transformed them. They were no longer the same people they were before the switch. They were better versions, stronger and more complete. As they walked away from the venue, feeling the lightness of victory, something magical happened. They felt a wave of energy pass through their bodies, and, in the blink of an eye, they were back in their original bodies. The relief and joy were immense, but also a deep sense of gratitude for each other. "We did it," said Peter, emotional. "We're back." "Yes," agreed Jane, tears of happiness in her eyes. "And now we know we can face anything together." The major obstacle had been overcome, not only reversing the body switch but also solidifying a friendship and mutual respect that would last forever. They moved forward, ready for whatever the future held, knowing that together, they were truly unbeatable. The obstacle Peter and Jane faced not only tested their mutual trust, but also forced them to confront and overcome deeply ingrained prejudices. They began to see the world through each other's eyes, which meant facing stereotypes and beliefs they had carried unknowingly. Peter always viewed his business world as the pinnacle of complexity and importance. He believed everything outside of this realm was secondary. However, by living Jane's life, he began to understand the discipline, risk, and passion required to be a stuntwoman. Each day was not just a physical test but a mental and emotional one. The prejudice he had against professions he considered less important started to dissolve. A significant example was when Peter, still in Jane's body, was invited to an event for stunt performers. At first, he felt out of place, surrounded by people who lived so differently from him. But as he talked with them, he discovered stories of resilience, courage, and camaraderie that were rare in his corporate world. He began to see the value and importance of each individual there, understanding that every profession, every passion, had its own dignity and merit. Jane, on the other hand, always saw the corporate world as cold and impersonal. To her, business was driven solely by profit and ambition, with no room for emotions or humanity. However, by living Peter's life, she began to see beyond this surface. She met employees who depended on Peter's decisions to support their families, saw the constant pressure to keep the company running, and the overwhelming responsibility he bore. One day, Jane, in Peter's body, had to deal with an employee going through personal difficulties. The man was underperforming and about to be fired. Normally, Jane would have seen this as a simple consequence of poor performance. But upon hearing the employee's story, his struggles and challenges, she felt deep empathy. Instead of firing him, she offered support, finding a position where he could recover and contribute more effectively. This experience was a turning point for Jane. She realized that behind the cold, rational decisions of business, there was a complex web of human lives. She saw the need for a balance between compassion and efficiency, something Peter practiced without her noticing. After a particularly challenging day, they met to discuss their discoveries. "I never imagined the depth of what you do," Peter said with a newfound respect. "Every jump, every movement is an expression of courage and art. I underestimated that." "I did too," Jane replied, reflecting. "I always saw the business world as inhuman, but now I see how much you care about each person, each decision. You carry a weight I never fully understood." These revelations brought a new layer of understanding and mutual respect. The prejudices that once separated them were being dismantled, replaced by deep empathy and recognition of the complexities of each other's lives. As they continued their journey, Peter and Jane became advocates for each other's passions and responsibilities. They learned to value not only their own experiences but also the differences that enriched them. And so, with each prejudice overcome, they grew closer to the complete understanding necessary to reverse the body switch, closer to becoming better versions of themselves. The intense routine and constant challenges gave way to moments of quiet, where Peter and Jane could reflect on everything they were experiencing. These moments of reflection were essential, allowing each to process the internal changes and profound transformation they were undergoing. One evening, after an exhausting day, Peter, still in Jane's body, decided to take a walk through the nearby park. The cool night air and the gentle rustling of leaves provided a perfect backdrop for introspection. He sat on a bench and began to think about his life before this surreal switch. Peter had always been driven by ambition and the relentless pursuit of success. Every decision was calculated, every move strategic. However, living Jane's life, he began to realize something he had always ignored: the importance of living in the moment, of feeling the pure emotion of being alive. The stunts, the falls, and even the injuries taught him that life wasn't just about control and planning, but also about embracing risks and uncertainty. As he reflected, Peter picked up his phone and began to record a voice message. "Jane, I know you're probably as overwhelmed as I am, but I need to say this. This experience has shown me how closed off I was in my own world. I thought my life was the only one that mattered, but now I see how wrong I was. You've taught me to value every moment, to feel life to its fullest. Thank you for that." Across town, Jane, in Peter's body, was sitting in his office, looking out over the city lights through the large panoramic window. She held a mug of hot tea, her mind wandering over recent events. Being Peter had challenged her in ways she never imagined. The constant pressure, the need to make decisions affecting so many lives, was a weight she now understood deeply. Jane thought about her own life, where the focus was on pushing physical limits and facing fear head-on. But in Peter's body, she learned that courage also lies in facing difficult decisions and bearing the responsibility for others' well-being. She picked up a piece of paper and began to write a letter to Peter. "Peter, I never thought I would say this, but living your life has taught me more about myself than I could have imagined. I always saw business as cold and soulless, but now I see the humanity in every decision you make. I've learned that courage isn't just about jumping off buildings, but also about making tough decisions that impact lives. Thank you for this lesson." These moments of reflection weren't just about understanding the other, but also about understanding themselves in a new context. They began to see their own lives with new eyes, appreciating the complexities and challenges they had once taken for granted. One night, gathered again at Peter's apartment, they shared these reflections. "I recorded something for you," Peter said, handing her the phone. "And I wrote something for you," Jane replied, giving him the letter. They listened and read in silence, absorbing each other's words. The messages were a testament to how much they had grown and learned. "We are changing," Peter said finally, "and I think it's for the better." "Yes," Jane agreed. "We are becoming more complete, more empathetic. And maybe that's part of the solution to get back to our lives." These moments of reflection were crucial. They not only reinforced the empathy and mutual respect, but also cemented the internal transformation each was experiencing. Peter and Jane were becoming better versions of themselves, ready to face whatever came next, knowing that, together, they could overcome any challenge. The shared challenges and intense experiences created a deep bond between Peter and Jane, transforming into a genuine desire to help each other overcome fears and difficulties. They realized that to return to their original bodies, they needed to confront and resolve issues they had always avoided. Peter, still in Jane's body, knew that one of Jane's biggest fears was an old knee injury that prevented her from performing one of the most challenging stunts of her career. This stunt, known as the Angel's Leap, was a combination of precision and courage, but the injury had left her insecure and afraid of getting hurt again. He knew he had to face this challenge to help her overcome this fear. At the studio, surrounded by fellow stunt performers and trainers, Peter prepared to attempt the jump. The atmosphere was charged with tension and anticipation. He took a deep breath, remembering all the lessons Jane had taught him about focus and determination. He climbed the platform and, with almost superhuman precision, executed the jump. In the moment of landing, he felt a wave of relief and joy. The reaction from the colleagues was applause and smiles, but most importantly, Peter knew that when Jane saw the recording of the jump, she would realize that her fear could be conquered. Meanwhile, Jane, in Peter's body, faced an equally significant challenge. Peter had always struggled with the emotional pressure of a major project involving the revitalization of a struggling community. The project required not only business skills, but also deep empathy and the ability to connect with the people affected. Jane decided it was time to tackle this head-on. She organized a meeting with the community leaders, listening carefully to their concerns and hopes. She used her natural ability to connect with people, something that always stood out in her stunt work, to build a bridge of trust with the community. Instead of just offering business solutions, she provided emotional and practical support, showing that the company truly cared. The community's reaction was transformative. People began to believe in the project, seeing it not just as a corporate endeavor but as a genuine partnership. Jane felt deep satisfaction seeing the first positive changes, knowing she was helping Peter overcome one of his biggest emotional barriers. One quiet night, they met to share their achievements. "You did it," said Jane, her eyes shining. "I saw the video of the jump. It was perfect." "And you saved the project," Peter replied, impressed. "You managed to turn it around." They embraced, feeling the deep connection that now bound them. "I think we're helping each other grow in ways we never imagined," said Jane, holding Peter's hand. "And maybe," Peter added, "that's the true purpose of all this, to learn, grow, and help each other." With these words, they realized they were closer than ever to understanding the lesson they needed to learn to switch back to their original bodies. But more importantly, they were becoming better people, stronger and more connected, ready to face any challenge together. With time running out, Peter and Jane knew they had to face one final challenge, something that would require everything they had learned and more. Fate seemed to conspire to bring about this last test, a situation that would test their new skills, empathy, and courage. It was a cold, rainy morning when the news broke. An emergency crisis threatened both Peter's business world and Jane's career. A crucial corporate merger was at risk due to an unexpected move by a competitor, while Jane had to perform a dangerous live stunt at an international film event. Both events were scheduled for the same day and time, in different parts of the city. Peter, in Jane's body, knew he had to perform the stunt she had always feared. The Angel's Leap, now live in front of thousands of spectators. Jane, in Peter's body, had to save the merger, negotiating with a group of ruthless executives determined to sabotage the deal. They decided that the only way to overcome the challenge was to trust each other completely and use everything they had learned during this time. With one last hug, they went their separate ways, taking with them the strength and confidence they had built together. On the film set, Peter took a deep breath, feeling the weight of expectations on him. He knew he couldn't fail. Feeling Jane's body, he found an unexpected calm. She was with him in spirit, her courage and passion infusing every move. When the time came for the jump, Peter focused, visualized the movement, and leaped. The world seemed to stop as he flew through the air, the perfection of his execution drawing applause and gasps from the crowd. Upon landing safely, he knew he had not only conquered the physical challenge, but also the fear that had always haunted Jane. At the same time, Jane was in the conference room, facing the executives with a mix of nervousness and determination. She used Peter's strategic intelligence and her own ability to connect emotionally. As the executives tried to manipulate her, she remained firm, disarming each attempt with solid arguments and unwavering confidence. When she finally presented the final proposal, she managed to turn the tables in their favor, securing the merger and surprising everyone in the room. After both events, Peter and Jane met again, exhausted but triumphant. "You did it," said Jane, smiling proudly. "I saw the leap. It was perfect." "And you saved the merger," replied Peter admiringly. "You managed to do the impossible." They hugged, knowing they had overcome the biggest challenge of their lives. The lessons learned, the trust built, and the empathy developed had transformed them. They were no longer the same people they were before the switch. They were better versions, stronger and more complete. As they walked away from the venue, feeling the lightness of victory, something magical happened. They felt a wave of energy pass through their bodies and, in the blink of an eye, they were back in their original bodies. The relief and joy were immense, but also a deep sense of gratitude for each other. "We did it," said Peter, emotional. "We're back." "Yes," agreed Jane, tears of happiness in her eyes. "And now we know we can face anything together." The big challenge had been overcome, not only reversing the body switch but also solidifying a friendship and mutual respect that would last forever. They moved forward, ready for whatever the future held, knowing that together, they were truly unbeatable. Peter and Jane had returned to their original bodies, but the bond they had developed did not disappear. In fact, the experience had connected them in such a deep way that they began to notice stronger feelings for each other. This new phase of their lives brought to light emotions they had tried to hide, but were now undeniable. They started spending more time together, not just out of gratitude or friendship, but out of a genuine desire to be in each other's company. They often had dinner together, discussing their experiences and dreams. With each conversation, their connection grew more intense, filled with meanings beyond words. One night, after an especially enjoyable dinner, Peter invited Jane for a walk in the park. The full moon illuminated their path as they walked side by side in comfortable silence. The air was fresh, and the gentle sound of leaves rustling created a magical atmosphere. "I never thought I would go through something like this," Peter said, breaking the silence, "and even less that I would find someone like you in the process." Jane smiled, her eyes shining in the moonlight. "Me neither, but I'm grateful for everything we've been through. I've learned so much, not just about you, but about myself too." They stopped by a lake, watching the moon's reflection on the water. Peter turned to Jane, holding her hands. "Jane, I want you to know that during all this time, it wasn't just about learning or overcoming challenges. It was about you. I saw your courage, your passion, and it inspired me in ways I never imagined." Jane felt her heart race, each of Peter's words resonating deeply within her. "Peter, you showed me a world I never would have known. Your strength, your intelligence, and the way you care about others, it changed my life." They moved closer, their faces inches apart. The world around them seemed to disappear as their eyes met, full of unspoken promises. "I don't want this to end here," Peter whispered, his voice full of emotion. "I want more than just friendship. I want you by my side, always." Jane smiled, tears of happiness streaming down her face. "I want that too, Peter. More than anything." They kissed under the moonlight, a kiss that sealed not only a growing love, but also a connection forged through the toughest trials. That moment was the culmination of everything they had been through together, the challenges, the lessons, the empathy, and finally, the love. As they pulled back, they kept their hands intertwined, knowing they were ready to face the future together, as partners in every sense. The connection they had developed was now the foundation of a relationship that promised to be as strong and resilient as they had become. The journey that began with an unexpected body switch and filled with challenges had now culminated in true love, showing that sometimes the greatest trials bring the most precious rewards. And so, Peter and Jane moved forward, ready to build a life together, knowing that nothing was impossible when they had each other. After the body switch and the intense challenges they faced, Peter and Jane were back in their lives, but not as before. Something profound had changed in both of them, and it led them to seek a more complete explanation for what they had experienced. They decided to investigate together the cause of the switch, hoping to find answers that would give meaning to the transformative experience they had shared. They started researching similar events, legends, and unexplained phenomena. They visited libraries, consulted experts in paranormal phenomena, and talked to people with similar stories. Their investigations led them to an old professor of philosophy and mystical studies, known for his knowledge of the inexplicable. The professor, an elderly man with bright eyes and a sharp mind, welcomed them into his cozy home filled with ancient books and mysterious artifacts. Seated around a large wooden table, the professor listened attentively to Peter and Jane's story, his eyes narrowing in concentration. "You have experienced something rare," the professor finally said, his voice soft but full of conviction. "Something beyond ordinary understanding. The body switch is not a simple accident. It is a phenomenon that occurs when two souls need to learn essential lessons that can only be understood through each other's eyes." Peter and Jane looked at each other, absorbing the professor's words. "But why us?" Jane asked, curiosity and anxiety mingling in her voice. The professor smiled. "Each of you carried prejudices, fears, and limitations that needed to be overcome. Peter, you needed to learn about courage and empathy, aspects embodied in Jane's world. Jane, you needed to understand the complexity and responsibility of Peter's world. You were chosen because the connection between you could lead to real transformation. Peter leaned forward, his mind working quickly. So, this was like a lesson, a test for us to become better versions of ourselves? The professor nodded. Exactly. And from what you've told me, you have passed with flying colors. You not only survived the difficulties, but also grew and learned to deeply value each other's experiences and emotions. Jane took a deep breath, feeling an inner peace begin to settle. This explains a lot. But now what? What do we do with this knowledge? Now, said the professor, his eyes gleaming with wisdom, you move forward, using everything you have learned. The experience you shared is a rare gift. You must use this understanding to enrich your lives and the lives of those around you. As they left the professor's house, Peter and Jane felt a new clarity. The revelation not only explained what had happened, but also validated the journey they had undertaken together. The connection they developed, the love that blossomed, it all had a greater purpose. Walking side by side through the quiet streets, Jane held Peter's hand. I think we finally understand why all this happened. Peter squeezed her hand, a gentle smile lighting up his face. Yes, and I'm grateful for every moment, not just because we got back to our bodies, but because we found something even more valuable, each other. They stopped, looking up at the starry sky, feeling the magnitude of what they had experienced. The revelation was not just an explanation. It was a call to live their lives with the wisdom and depth they had gained. Together, they were ready to face the future, knowing that any challenge could be overcome when they had someone so special by their side. With the revelation from the professor, Peter and Jane began to realize that there was still one final lesson to learn, something that would connect them even more deeply and complete the transformation they had started. This lesson wasn't about the external world, but about the inner world, about fully accepting who they were and what they meant to each other. The days passed in a mix of routine and reflection. Both felt they were on the brink of something important, something that would take them to a deeper level of understanding and connection. Then, one night, while walking through the illuminated city, Peter suggested something unexpected. Let's go back to where it all began, he said, his voice full of determination. The cafe where we first met. Jane smiled, understanding immediately. Yes, I think it's time to face that moment and see what more we can learn. The next morning, they met at the busy cafe, now a symbol of transformation for both of them. They sat at the same table, the environment familiar but loaded with new meanings. They ordered coffee and sat in silence for a moment, each absorbing the importance of the place. I was so focused on myself that day, Peter said, looking at his coffee cup. I thought I had all the answers, that I knew everything I needed to know. But when we met and everything changed, I realized how wrong I was. Jane nodded, holding Peter's hand across the table. I felt the same. I always thought my life was simple compared to yours, but I discovered that courage and strength are needed in all areas, no matter what we do. Peter looked deeply into Jane's eyes. The final lesson, I think, is about total acceptance. Accepting not just our lives and challenges, but also the love and connection we found. We need to let go of any doubts or fears about what we feel for each other. Jane smiled, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. You're right. We've been through so much together, and it's time to accept that we deserve this happiness, that we can build a life together, full of love and understanding. They stood up, still holding hands, and walked through the busy streets. They felt a lightness and freedom they had never experienced before. They were ready to embrace everything life had to offer. Together. That night, sitting on Peter's apartment terrace under the starry sky, they made a silent pact. They promised to always support each other, always love each other, and always remember the lessons they had learned. The body switch, the challenges, the victories, and the defeats all had been a preparation for this moment. Jane, Peter said softly, pulling her closer, I love you, and I want to spend the rest of my life with you, facing whatever comes our way. Jane smiled, feeling the warmth of Peter's words. I love you too, Peter. And I know that together, we can face anything. With a kiss under the stars, they sealed their promise. The final lesson, about acceptance and true love, had been learned. Now they were ready to build a future together, knowing that any obstacle could be overcome because they had each other. Peter and Jane had finally learned all the lessons that the body switch had to offer. With their hearts and minds profoundly transformed, they were ready to return to their original lives, but this time with a new perspective and an unbreakable bond. That morning, they woke up in their own bodies, feeling different, more complete. The switch, which initially seemed like a nightmare, was now seen as a blessing in disguise. They met at the same cafe where it all began, sitting at the same table that had been the stage for their transformation. "We're back," Jane said, a calm smile lighting up her face. "But nothing will ever be the same." Peter nodded, looking around the familiar environment with new eyes. "Yes, now we know what really matters, and we're ready to face the future together." They spent the day discussing plans, sharing dreams, and creating strategies for their professional and personal lives. With renewed confidence, Peter returned to his company, now more empathetic and aware of the importance of each decision. Jane, with her reinforced courage, resumed her career as a stuntwoman, ready to face any challenge with the certainty that she could overcome anything. However, the transformation was not just internal. They decided to implement changes in their respective fields, reflecting the lessons they had learned. Peter introduced wellness policies for his employees, creating a more humane and supportive work environment. Jane began mentoring new stunt performers, sharing not just techniques but also the importance of mental and emotional health. The results were surprising. Peter's company thrived as never before, not just financially but also in terms of employee satisfaction and loyalty. Jane became a respected leader in the stunt community, inspiring and guiding the next generation with wisdom and compassion. But the greatest transformation was in their personal lives. Peter and Jane became inseparable, finding strength and comfort in each other. Every challenge, every joy was shared, strengthening the bond that had united them in such an extraordinary way. Their nights were filled with deep conversations and laughter, their mornings with anticipation of what they could achieve together. One day, they decided to take a trip to a quiet place, away from daily pressures. In a cabin in the mountains, surrounded by nature, they reflected on the journey that had brought them to this point. "Do you remember when all this started?" Peter asked, looking at the horizon. "How could I forget?" Jane replied, smiling. "It was the beginning of everything, and I'm so grateful for every moment, even the difficult ones." Peter took Jane's hand, his eyes filled with love. "I am too, and I know that, no matter what happens, we will be ready. Because together, we are invincible." They sealed their promise with a kiss, knowing they were ready for the future, no matter what it brought. The transformation was not just about returning to who they were before, but about becoming better versions of themselves, equipped with the wisdom and love they had acquired along the way. And so, Peter and Jane continued their lives, now more connected, stronger, and more in love than ever. Returning to their original bodies was not just an end, but the beginning of a new adventure together, ready to face any challenge and embrace all the opportunities that life had to offer.